Welcome to Let's Talk, a podcast series produced by Hazelden Betty Ford. I'm William C. Moyers, your host, and today we have a special story for you, a story of addiction, redemption, recovery, and giving back to help others. My guest is Jeff Goldring, my friend and fellow traveler who joins us from his home in New Orleans. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, William, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you. Actually, I said that you were joining me from your home, but I think you're in your office there today. But here we are together. And Jeff, you and I are talking in August of 2021. Tell me why this is a special year for you.
Yeah, well, this year, actually June 16th celebrates 20 years in continuous recovery for me.
Wow. And how and what's that last 20 years been like?
It's been, fantastic. I mean, the journey has been great. I've met people that I've never would have met. I've accomplished things in terms of, family stuff and business stuff, that never, would have happened if I continued down the road of, drinking and drugging.
And you are back in New Orleans where you've lived your whole life. You and I were talking the other day. You just had a birthday and you were born in New Orleans. How did you end up at Hazelden in 2001?
Well, how did I get there? I got there on an airplane.
Okay, good.
and what had happened, the first time I went to treatment was in October of 2000. I ended up in Hanley, Hazelden, down in West Palm, and then came up, 9 months later up to Minnesota. And what happened was, I don't know, for a long time, I had been able to compartmentalize my life, my work, family, everything, my drinking and drugging. And then at the end, it all just kind of came crashing down together. And I had ran out of, options. And I always joked that I had a lot of back problems at the time, right? My wife was on my back, my parents were on my back. And the thing it seemed like I had to do was, go to treatment.
And so you came back that second time to Hazelden. When you got here, what was different? What was different the second time?
Well, the difference was, I think I had reached, a bottom, and I was finally able to see, the powerlessness and the unmanageability. When I went the first time to treatment, I wasn't there because I wanted to be there. I don't know if I was there the second time because I wanted to be there. But, the first time it was like, they said to me, they're like, in this auditorium, I remember it was, look to the right and look to the left. And most of the people will either be out drinking again shortly or they're going to die. And I thought, well, who could that be? It's certainly not going to be me. But, I went home and I did some outpatient treatment and I started going to meetings, but I didn't do anything that was suggested, right? I didn't get a sponsor. I wasn't connecting with other people in recovery. I was, trying to do it basically on my own. The only thing I did right was every time I picked up, I came back into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and I kept picking up, a 24-hour trip. And then finally something happened. I hit that personal bottom. I was on the airplane heading up to Minnesota and I started crying. And I was like, I'm powerless. God, please help me. And at that point, I think I was willing, at least, became willing to take some direction and just start doing, the next right thing.
And so you've been doing the next right thing for 20 years, a day at a time. What works for you along the way?
Yeah. What really works for me is, going to meetings, doing, service work inside and outside of the, program, staying connected with other alcoholics, and just staying in the middle of the herd. Um, and those are the biggest, things. And knowing that, like, left to my own devices, I'll go back out again, right? And so I heard that message loud and clear when I was up in Minnesota. And so, I just try to do this thing one day at a time, and kind of stay in a place of, humility about it, and know that, the only reason why I'm sober today is there is something bigger, something greater in my life, whether you choose to call it higher power, God, that's helping me with this, because I could never do it on my own.
Yeah. What's been the biggest challenge, Jeff, in the last 20 years walking it a day at a time?
Look, life has not been perfect over the last 20 years, but there hasn't been anything that's been like, really, what I'd say is unmanageable. But I've had, friends die, sober friends and non-sober friends. I've had, things going on at work and trying to figure out how I fit into a family business. I've gotten divorced and I've gotten remarried. My current wife and I have had like kids, and that was a struggle. Talk about really learning about powerlessness, trying to have like kids and do fertility stuff, and I've had, at 47 years old or something, I had parents that got divorced. I've had all of these like kind of life events happen in recovery, and, the solution's always the same for me. It's like, I go to meetings, I connect with other alcoholics, I share honestly about what's going on, and, and then everything seems to work out.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, your wife, Walton Goldring, and is also a woman in long-term recovery. I think she's been walking her walk about the same amount of time that you have, even though you all weren't walking it together back then, as you noted. Does that help to have a spouse in recovery, or does that make it particularly tricky?
For us, it really works because we have a common, language, that we talk to, each other. And when we're out to, dinner, and there's other people that are drinking, we could sit and laugh like, do you think these people are having more fun, or would we be more fun if we were, out there, drinking? Or are we losers because we don't drink anymore? And we sit there and we look at each other and we say, and then we kind of laugh about it. But, there's never once that I've gotten up the next morning that said like, oh, we would have had a lot more fun if we were, drinking last night. But, in terms of the way, just we do life, it helps to have these principles that we live by, in our, relationship. And, when wrong, promptly, admit it. And, we can talk openly and honestly about anything with each other, because we apply these principles, and these steps in our life on a daily basis. So
what's interesting about recovery is they tell us when we're in treatment at Hazelden, Betty Ford, or wherever, that we need to be cognizant of the people, places, and things that need to change. But what's interesting about your dynamic is that you returned to a family that works in a business and has for generations that's centered on alcohol. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because most alcoholics, when you ask that question, like, about the family history about alcohol, they start talking about the other alcoholics in their family that have died, right? The brother that's in treatment, the uncle that died, and the father that wasn't present. None of that is true in my family, right? I grew up in a family business. I'm fourth generation in the family business. It started out as a small little business in Pensacola, Florida, where there was some distribution of beer and a bar room. And this is like in the late 1800s, and it grew into, we're the largest distiller in America. We also do some beer distribution. And you know what? Nobody in my family has ever really drank except for me. Um, I always joke like about my dad, that like he's probably got a lot of the isms, just alcohol isn't, one of them. But my mother didn't drink growing up. My dad might have had like a beer after he went jogging, or one drink when he was at like a social kind of thing for business. But he didn't drink in the house. And my grandfather was the same, way. And so I'm like the only alcoholic in this family. And I'll tell you, it's been tricky along the way, not necessarily in recovery, but I remember having conversations, with my dad, where he would say, if you can't stop drinking, you're not going to be able to work in this business. And then he would say, if you can't stop drinking, we're going to have to sell this family business.
Oh my God.
And none of that in itself, was enough to get me to stop. And it's funny, early in recovery, we had similar conversations about like, hey, do you think you can actually work in the liquor business as a sober alcoholic? And, when I first got sober, I was trying to do it on my own, right? And then people told me, if you hang out at a barbershop, you're going to get long enough, you're going to get a haircut. And, I heard a speaker up in Minnesota on a Sunday night, and he talked about, we always get the message when we need it. He talked about, working in a brewery after he got sober. He'd been working there for 40 years, and he drank there every, after work. And, once he got sober, he continued working there because he needed the job. And that gave me a lot of hope that I could work in, this business. And then, I found in the big book where it says, if we're spiritually fit, we can go anywhere and do anything. And, that's been my experience, like working in the, liquor business over the last 20 years. Is, look, I don't have to be the guy that, tastes the stuff. I don't have to be the person going to the bar promotions. But I can, work in this, business. And so I've been able to do it successfully.
And be successful in working in the business. And interestingly enough, I was down there with you about 2 years ago. You actually carry the message of recovery now into the liquor business. I heard you speak and share your own story and talk about that. That must be sort of an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. At that, there was this kind of liquor convention here in New Orleans called Tales of the Cocktail. It was for, bartenders, and we had made a donation to the cause because they started a program called Beyond the Bar. And, it focused on, mental health for people in the industry. And so, as I was, presenting this check, I was able to say that I am a man in long-term, recovery, and I'm still able to work in this business. And, I can't tell you how many people, came up to me afterwards and, said they had, admired my courage to talk about that. And it's a big deal, I think, because there is this stigma that revolves around alcoholism that, I think is, I've seen some footage of, Marty Mann talking about the stigma back in the, 40s or 50s. I don't know where the footage was from. And you had me up to Minnesota at one point to talk about advocacy and getting out in the community. And at that point in time, like, I was like, I hear you, but I don't know how I tell my story without talking about, Alcoholics Anonymous. And AA is, this anonymity. And what I've learned is I can talk about being in recovery and not drinking, and not have to say that I'm in a 12-step program unless somebody asks. And then like I can have a sidebar conversation and when they say, how did you do it? And so it's been a big shift, for me.
Well, and you've been a very important advocate in the alcohol industry and in the recovery industry, in the recovery community, and even in this, carrying the message here through this Let's Talk podcast. Jeff, you talked about you and your family's philanthropy and your support. You've been, giving back is a big feature of the Goldring family. And of course, Hazelden Betty Ford continues to benefit from yours and Walton's and the Goldring family's generosity. Why is philanthropy important to you?
Well, the values of philanthropy, I think they were instilled in me since I was, a young kid. And I had many conversations with my grandfather about, we have this, business that we profit from, and we take dollars out of the community, and it's important to put the dollars back into the community. And my father also said, like, hey, it's not enough just to stop with writing the check. You can't just stop there, right? Giving your time is also very, very important. And so, it's just been how I was brought up. I get a really, good feeling about, being able to give back and help other people.
Yes, and you've done a lot of that. One of the interesting areas before we wrap it up is your commitment to giving back to fund new exercise equipment for the patients at our facility in Center City, Minnesota. Why is exercise important to you, Jeff?
Yeah, so we just made a multi-year large donation to Hazelden. And part of it, I need to say this, I need to put a plug in for Jelnik because that's where I was for, part of the money is going to help rehab, Jelnik, and part of the money is going, I can't remember, with
mental
the
health,
family.
Mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. And the last part, which I felt really strongly about is going to like rehab the exercise place. And I don't know exactly what it looks like today, but I knew what it looked like 20 years ago. When I was up there. And look, I believe recovery today, right? We always talk about it being mind, body, spirit, right? It's a holistic, program. And so I've got to be healthy in all, parts of, my life. And so myself, I've always exercised a lot. I played sports, growing up, and as my knees have gotten bad, I've, shifted to doing things like yoga and riding a stationary bicycle and, lifting, weights. But I believe, physical fitness is just as important as anything. My wife always jokes that, like exercise, we exercise around in the evenings together. So, and she says it's like our cocktail hour because we're able to like let go of like whatever has happened during the, the day. I will tell you, yoga is a big thing for me. And I had done a little bit of yoga before I got sober, but when I was up at in Minnesota, we had this substitute counselor on the unit, and he shared this. He was doing the graduate program in Hazelden, and he had written this paper, this thesis on yoga and the Minnesota model of recovery and the similarities. And, as I've continued to do yoga, I've seen, more and more, similarities. And a lot of it is, about this, it's just very congruent, right? Especially for people in early recovery, yoga is a great stress reliever. And so is kind of any exercise, I think. Like if you feel like wanting to have a drink, go take a walk around the block, right? Or go do some yoga and the feelings will pass. So it's just something that's really, important to me.
Jeff, you talk about mind, body, and spirit, and of course, your philanthropy has oftentimes benefited the mind, body, and spirit of a person in recovery through treatment and through aftercare recovery support. Talk to us about why part of your donation to Hazel and Betty Ford was directed towards our mental health services.
I believe there's just such a need in the world today, for more of these services and for people to go. And I think, the reason why we give to Hazelden is because I trust that when I write the check to Hazelden, that the money's going to be, used in an appropriate fashion.
Jeff Goldring from New Orleans, thank you for sharing your experience, strength, and hope with us today.
Thanks for having me.
We'll have you on another time too, for sure. And thank you all for joining us. Just a reminder, as Jeff said, addiction to alcohol and other drugs, it doesn't discriminate, but treatment does work and recovery is possible. So if you or a loved one are struggling, don't wait. It's okay to ask for help. It's important that you ask for help now. I'm your host, William C. Moyers. I hope you'll join us again for another edition of Let's Talk. See you soon.